I'm going to talk about one very specific thing in this video, and that question is this. Do you love God? And do you know what that means to love God? And do you know what that looks like when a person loves God? Alright, in this video we're going to break down exactly what it looks like to truly love God. We're going to tell the story of the Thessalonian church and how they came to Christ. So guys, please enjoy my first video of Working the Word. I hope you like it. Welcome to Working the Word. I'm your host, Andrew Beckman, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about the church that was the definitive church of the early Christian movement. Yes, my friends, I'm talking about the church at Thessalonica. So sit back, relax, and let's learn some truth. To get a really good feel for this church, its story and its position before the letter of 1 Thessalonians, we got to go back to when Paul first entered Thessalonians, fresh off of Philippi. Now, Paul was fresh off some pretty crazy stuff going down in Philippi, namely his imprisonment and then release, and the jailer being converted to Christianity. I'd love to tell you about all that stuff, but that's not what this episode is about. Subscribe if you want to see that episode in the future, because I'll probably do it sometime. But Paul comes into Thessalonica pretty hyped, all right? Even though persecution has beaten him up, God has continued to show love in some pretty crazy and unique ways. Per was his custom, he went to the synagogue as soon as he arrived in Thessalonica. And he speaks with the Jews about Jesus being their Messiah. And he reasons that Christ must die to fulfill the law and bring the new covenant. And as he converses with them, a bunch of the Jews there believe, and interestingly enough, it says not a few of the devout Greeks, and a lot of what the word calls the leading women. I love that phrase. But the Jews, being jealous, stir the pot. They get a mob going, and they attack this guy named Jason, because Jason first received Paul's teaching when Paul came to Thessalonica. But they're not able to find Paul, so they take Jason to the authorities, and they basically take some of his money and they let him go. You know, as you do when you're facing a bunch of potentially dangerous group of radicals who are spewing things about kings and turning the city upside down. And this being no longer a safe place for Paul, the believers there send him away immediately. Paul's not even in Thessalonica that long before it becomes too dangerous for him to stay. And that's Paul's encounter with Thessalonica. Acts 17 doesn't say exactly how long it was that Paul spent there, but based on what's stated here, it's not very long. And that's supported by things that Paul says later in his letter to the Thessalonian church. But what is so interesting is how quickly the Thessalonians drop everything and are willing to be persecuted and die for this faith of theirs. The text gives no indication that Jason or any other believers knew Paul before he came to Thessalonica. So that means that they meet Paul, and then within, let's be generous and say 6 months, although it could have been as short a time as a couple of days, they're ready to sacrifice themselves to be persecuted so that Paul can get out of the city alive. Why? What would inspire that kind of devotion? I think the answer can be found in their conversion. Paul's words are simple. This Jesus, whom I proclaim to you, is the Christ. And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul. This is it, guys. If there's one thing I want you to leave this episode with, it's this. Paul taught them about Jesus, not about good works, not about some good moral system. He taught them about Christ, how Christ died and was buried, and how he loves. And when you understand the fullness of God's love, then everything changes. It no longer matters that you have stuff to do, because all your priorities change to make room for God in your heart. And that's my challenge to you, my friends. Would you drop everything to preach the gospel? To live the gospel? Would you drop volleyball? Your Saturday night volleyball league? Would you drop Fortnite? Would you forget what your Uncle Bill and Aunt Marge think about you? Because you know the love of God. God loves on purpose. These Thessalonians, these new believers, loved on purpose. Will you love on purpose? Thank you guys so much for tuning in to Working the Word. I'll be back next week with episode 2 on the Thessalonian church. So if you like this video and want to see more of this stuff, go ahead and click that subscribe button so you don't miss anything coming up. Love you all. Hashtag respect to each of you. Peace. I like that.